The sound of Olivia's phone buzzing against the kitchen counter was like a faint alarm bell in my brain. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibration that blended into the background of our morning routine. But for some reason, it grabbed my attention. I glanced up from the toaster, watching her carefully. She stood at the window, her back to me, sipping her coffee and staring at the garden. She didn't even flinch. "Your phone's buzzing," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her profile, and then shrugged. "Probably a scam call," she said, her voice breezy. She didn't even look at it. She didn't move toward it. That's when I felt it, the first flicker of something. Suspicion? No, that wasn't it. It was more like unease. The kind of unease you feel when you walk into a silent room and sense that someone was just there. Olivia was warm, loving even. On the surface, everything was fine. But beneath that morning sunlight streaming through the windows, something felt off. I tried to shake it off. I wasn't that kind of husband, the kind who reads into every little thing, who checks his wife's phone or questions her every move. We'd been married for 9 years. We loved each other. We had a good life. Routine, maybe, but good. I had no reason to doubt her. And yet, as I watched her standing there, her shoulders stiff and her coffee mug gripped just a bit too tightly, I couldn't help but wonder. "Lucas, can you grab the eggs?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was bright again, like nothing had ever been wrong. I nodded, trying to shake off the weird feeling in my gut. Our mornings were always the same. I'd make breakfast while she sipped her coffee and half listened to the news on the radio. We'd sit at the table, eating in companionable silence, and then go our separate ways, me to the office, her to her studio downtown. Olivia ran a small but successful design business. She'd always been driven, confident, and fiercely independent. It was one of the things I loved about her. But that morning, the routine felt different. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she picked it up, but only to silence it. She didn't open the message or call back. I tried not to read into it, but my mind was already spinning. I told myself it was nothing. Just a scam call, like she said. But that flicker of unease lingered, even as I kissed her goodbye and headed out the door. I didn't know it then, but that flicker was the beginning of everything. It wasn't until later that week that the unease turned into something heavier. It started with a text message. One I wasn't supposed to see. Olivia had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to grab her laptop. I was making tea, my mind on autopilot, when the screen lit up with a notification. I glanced at it out of habit, not intending to snoop, but what I saw stopped me cold. "Can't wait to see you again. Friday can't come soon enough. See." My stomach twisted. It wasn't just the message itself, it was the tone. It was intimate, familiar. And the sender? Just a single letter, C. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The message disappeared after a few seconds, the screen going dark again, but the words were seared into my brain. Who was C? And why would they be so eager to see my wife? I tried to stay calm. There could be an explanation. Maybe it was a coworker or a client. Olivia's work often involved meeting new people, networking, building relationships. But something about the message didn't feel professional. It felt personal. When Olivia came back downstairs, I forced myself to act normal. I handed her the tea I'd made, my hand trembling slightly, and watched as she picked up her phone. She unlocked it and glanced at the screen, her expression carefully neutral. Then, just as quickly, she locked it again and set it down. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, why?" she replied, smiling at me. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, letting it drop. But from that moment on, I couldn't stop thinking about the text. It was like a splinter in my mind, small but impossible to ignore. I started noticing other things, 2 signs I'd heard about in cheating stories but had never thought I'd see in my own life. Olivia had been working late more often, claiming she had meetings or deadlines, but her excuses felt thin. She'd started wearing perfume again, the expensive kind I'd bought her years ago when we were dating. She'd stopped wearing it for a while, said it gave her headaches. But now, suddenly, she was spritzing it on before leaving the house. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had no proof. But the seed of suspicion had already been planted, and it was growing fast. 2 days later, I found the first real piece of evidence. It was Saturday morning, and Olivia had left for what she called a business brunch. I stayed home, catching up on emails and mowing the lawn. When I went to grab my jacket from the closet, I noticed something tucked into the pocket of her coat, a piece of paper, folded neatly. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and unfolded it, my heart racing. It was a receipt. From a boutique hotel downtown. The date was from 2 days ago, Thursday night. The time read 8:30 p.m. It felt like a scenario straight out of Reddit cheating stories, and for the first time, I understood the gut-wrenching panic those posts described. I stared at it, my mind reeling. Olivia had told me she was working late that night. She'd come home around 9:30, looking flushed and apologetic, saying she'd been stuck in traffic. She hadn't mentioned a hotel. My hands trembled as I folded the receipt back up and shoved it into my pocket. I felt like I was in a dream, or a nightmare. The kind where everything looks normal on the surface, but underneath, everything is wrong. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I stopped myself. If she was lying, she'd just deny it. I needed more. I needed proof. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I couldn't stop thinking about the receipt. It was like a weight in my pocket, burning a hole through the fabric. Olivia seemed perfectly at ease, laughing at the sitcom we were watching, occasionally leaning over to touch my arm or rest her head on my shoulder. But all I could think about was the hotel. And the text from C. Something was going on. I didn't know what, but I was determined to find out. The voice didn't belong in my house. It was deep, smooth, with a practiced charm. I heard it as soon as I stepped into the living room, my briefcase still in hand. Olivia stood by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and tense. She hadn't heard me come in. "No, Chris. I told you I can't do this anymore," she said softly. Her back was to me, her shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before. "It's too risky." He's starting to notice. Chris. That name struck me like a thunderbolt. See, the name from the text. The person who couldn't wait to see her. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. "Just give me more time," she whispered. "I'll figure it out." I didn't stay to hear the rest. My feet moved on their own, carrying me upstairs to our bedroom. My thoughts were a whirlwind, a tangle of anger, confusion, and fear. Who was Chris? What was too risky? And what exactly was she figuring out? This felt like the kind of plot twist you'd hear in cheating audio stories, except this was my life, unraveling in real time. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm the storm in my head. I could hear Olivia downstairs, her voice growing softer until it stopped entirely. A few minutes later, she came upstairs, her usual smile plastered on her face. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're home early." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, skipped the last meeting. Wasn't feeling great." Her face softened with concern. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "No, I'm fine," I said quickly, brushing her off. I couldn't stand the way she looked at me, so warm and caring, like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't hiding something. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly. Or at least pretended to. My mind replayed her conversation with Chris over and over, dissecting every word, every pause. I thought about the text, the hotel receipt, the perfume. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they were forming didn't make any sense. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called off work, waited for Olivia to leave, and started searching. Her studio was spotless, her laptop password protected, her phone glued to her side. But in her desk drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old receipts, I found an envelope. Inside was a photo of Olivia and a man I didn't recognize. They were standing close, their arms brushing, their smiles too bright. He was tall, dark-haired, with an easy confidence that practically leapt off the page. On the back of the photo, in her handwriting, was a single word, Chris. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my hands trembling. I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal, the lies, or the fact that I still didn't know the whole story. But I was going to find out. No matter what it took. That night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The anger, the suspicion, the constant knot in my stomach, it all came to a head. Olivia was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, when I slammed the photo onto the table in front of her. "What's this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She froze, her eyes flicking to the photo. For a moment, I thought I saw fear flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with confusion. "Where did you get that?" "Don't play dumb, Olivia," I snapped. "Who is he? Who's Chris?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. Finally, she sighed, leaning back in her chair. He's an old friend. An old friend? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So, your old friend is the one you've been meeting at hotels? The one you've been texting? The one you were on the phone with yesterday? Her eyes widened. You were listening to my call? She asked, her voice rising in anger. I didn't answer. My mind was too full of questions, filled with images of cheating stories and the possibility that I was now part of one. That's not the point. I shouted. The point is that you're lying to me, Olivia. You've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months, and I want to know why. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not having this conversation with you right now. Yes, you are, I said, grabbing her arm as she tried to walk away. You don't get to walk away from this. She yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing with anger. You don't understand, Lucas. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I demanded. Tell me the truth for once. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something, but then she shook her head. I can't. And with that, she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, the photo still on the table. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. She couldn't tell me? What the hell did that mean? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was my wife cheating? Being blackmailed? Hiding something dangerous? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. But one thing was clear, whatever was going on, it was bigger than I'd realized. I followed her. I didn't want to, but I didn't see any other choice. She'd been lying to me, hiding things, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it continue. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I was going to find it myself. It was Friday evening, and Olivia had told me she was meeting a client downtown. She'd been vague about the details, but I didn't press her. Instead, I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her car. She didn't go downtown. She went to the same boutique hotel from the receipt I'd found. My chest tightened as I parked across the street, watching her step out of the car. She was dressed up, her hair and makeup perfect, her shoulders squared like she was preparing for battle. She walked inside without looking back. I waited a few minutes before following her. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I couldn't turn back now. Inside, the lobby was quiet. Olivia was nowhere to be seen, but the receptionist gave me a suspicious look as I lingered near the elevators. I pretended to check my phone, trying to act casual, but my hands were shaking. Then I saw her. She was stepping into an elevator with Chris, the man from the photo. They didn't touch, but the way they looked at each other said everything. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run after them, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. Instead, I turned and walked out of the hotel, my mind spinning. I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal or the fact that I still didn't know why. This felt like one of those cheating passion stories where the truth was just out of reach, taunting me. But one thing was certain, Olivia was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. No matter what it took. I wasn't prepared for what came next. I thought I was chasing an affair, a betrayal of the heart, but what I found was darker, more twisted than I could have imagined. After that night at the hotel, I could no longer ignore the truth. Olivia wasn't just hiding something from me, she was in deep, tangled up in something dangerous. My mind replayed the scene 100 times since I'd seen her with Chris. That look in her eyes when she spoke to him, the way they slipped into the elevator together, it wasn't just infidelity. There was fear, hesitation, something deeper than lust. And I had to know what it was. The next morning, I decided to confront her again. But before I could even open my mouth, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Reluctantly, I picked up. Lucas, isn't it? The voice was male, smooth, and far too calm. My stomach clenched. Let me save you some trouble. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Who the hell is this? I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. Olivia, who was in the kitchen, glanced over at me, her brows furrowing. I turned away, lowering my voice. What do you want? I want you to stay out of it, the man replied. You're playing in a league you don't understand. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. The line went dead before I could respond. My hands were shaking as I lowered the phone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Who was this? Chris? Someone else? And how did they know I'd been digging? Did they know I'd followed Olivia to the hotel? Olivia walked into the room then, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me one, her expression cautious. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I studied her face, trying to read her, but she was a closed book. I wanted to tell her about the call, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or instinct. If she was involved in something dangerous, what would confronting her accomplish? Would she even tell me the truth? "Yeah," I lied. "Work stuff." She nodded, but I could see the tension in her posture. She didn't believe me. And I didn't believe her. That night, I did something reckless. I waited until she was asleep, then snuck into her studio. I knew it was a risk, she was a light sleeper, but I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I needed answers. Her desk was meticulously organized, but I didn't care about the chaos I left in my wake. I rifled through drawers, papers, anything that might give me a clue. And then I found it, a burner phone, tucked beneath a stack of old sketchbooks. My hands trembled as I turned it on. There were only a handful of messages, all from the same number. One of them made my blood run cold. "He's getting too close. We may need to deal with him." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Were they talking about me? My world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much bigger, far beyond the scope of the cheating audio stories I'd once dismissed as overly dramatic. The house felt colder than usual as I sat in the dark, clutching the burner phone. My thoughts were racing, spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Was Olivia planning something with Chris? Were they trying to get rid of me? And why? What had I stumbled into? I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act. This wasn't just a story anymore, not one of those cheating passion stories you hear about. It was my life, and I was spiraling deeper into its chaos. The messages on the burner phone were vague, but they hinted at a meeting, one set for later that night. The location was a warehouse on the outskirts of town. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this where they met to plan their betrayal? Or was it something more sinister? I didn't tell Olivia where I was going. She'd know I was onto her, and I couldn't risk tipping her off. Instead, I waited until she left the house, then grabbed my car keys and drove to the address in the texts. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its metal walls gleaming faintly under the light of the moon. The parking lot was empty except for a single black SUV. I parked far enough away to stay hidden and crept toward the building. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. As I got closer, I heard voices, low, urgent, and unmistakably familiar. Olivia's voice. And Chris's. "You don't understand," Olivia was saying. "This wasn't part of the deal. I won't let you hurt him." "You don't have a choice," Chris replied, his tone cold. "He's already involved. If he keeps digging, he's a liability." Liability. The word sent a chill through me. They were talking about me. My fists clenched as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. But I held back. I needed to hear more. "There has to be another way," Olivia pleaded. "I'll handle him. Just give me time." "You've had time," Chris snapped. "You're too soft, Olivia. If you can't deal with him, I will." I couldn't listen anymore. The anger, the fear, it all boiled over. I stepped into the doorway, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Deal with me how, Chris?" They both froze, their faces pale as they turned to face me. Olivia's eyes widened in horror. Chris recovered quickly, his lips curling into a smirk. Well, he said. "Look who decided to join us." Olivia stepped forward, her hands raised as if to calm me. "Lucas, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I shouted. "Because right now, it sounds a lot like you're plotting to get rid of me." Chris laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Lucas." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Because all I see is my wife lying to me and meeting some stranger in the middle of the night." Olivia looked like she was about to speak, but Chris cut her off. "You want the truth? Fine. But you're not going to like it." The truth hit me like a punch to the gut, unraveling in a way that made the cheating audio stories I'd once mocked seem tame by comparison. Chris wasn't just some affair partner. He was a criminal, a manipulative, dangerous man who had Olivia trapped in his web. It started with a loan, Olivia admitted, her voice trembling. The business was struggling, and I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could fix it on my own. Chris offered to help. "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "You thought borrowing money from someone like him was a good idea?" "I didn't know what he was," she said, tears streaming down her face. Not at first. But by the time I realized, it was too late. He had leverage, photos, documents. He threatened to ruin me. To ruin us. I turned to Chris, my fists clenched. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it had escalated far beyond the cheating stories I'd heard about. This was something darker. So all of this, your meetings, the texts, the hotel, it was blackmail? Chris shrugged, unbothered by my anger. Call it what you want. Olivia made a deal, and now she's paying the price. You're disgusting, I spat. Whatever you think you have on her, it ends tonight. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. And what are you going to do about it? Call the cops? Go ahead. See how far that gets you. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless, standing there in the face of his arrogance. But then I looked at Olivia, her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, and I knew I couldn't let him win. I lunged at Chris, my anger fueling me. The two of us crashed to the ground, fists flying, the sound of our struggle echoing through the empty warehouse. Olivia screamed, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until I'd made him pay for everything he'd done. By the time it was over, Chris was on the ground, groaning in pain. Olivia pulled me away, her hands gripping my arms. Lucas, stop. You'll kill him. I stood there, panting, my knuckles raw and bleeding. Chris glared up at me, his smirk finally gone. You're making a mistake, he hissed. This isn't over. But as I looked at Olivia, I knew it was over for us. The lies, the secrets, it had all taken its toll. We left the warehouse that night, but the damage had already been done. The aftermath of Chris's threats and Olivia's choices would haunt us for a long time. Whether we could rebuild from the wreckage or not, I didn't know. But one thing was certain, life as we knew it was over. The air in the warehouse felt heavier than before, as if the tension from the confrontation with Chris had seeped into the very walls. Olivia was trembling beside me, clutching the recording device she had revealed moments earlier. Chris had stormed out, but his threat, "This isn't over," hung in the air like a storm cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. I turned to Olivia, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the dim fluorescent lights overhead. We need to call the police, I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. This can't go on. You can't keep running, Olivia. She shook her head violently, her hair whipping around her face. You don't understand, Lucas. Chris is not just some criminal. He has people, connections. If we go to the police, he'll find out, and he'll come after us. After you. I'm not afraid of him, I said, though my voice betrayed a slight tremor. The truth was, I was terrified. Not for myself, but for her. For us. For whatever was left of the life we had built together. We can't let him control us anymore. Olivia looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperation I had never seen before. It's not just about us. If he goes down, he's going to drag everyone with him. He's got dirt on people, important people. That's why I couldn't tell you. I was trying to keep you safe. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the lies, the secrets, the months of betrayal, it was too much. You should have told me, I said, my voice breaking. You should have trusted me. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Everything I did for us. Before I could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the moment. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned toward the door. A second later, the metallic clang of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Chris was back. And he wasn't alone. 3 men entered behind him, all dressed in black, their faces shadowed under the dim lights. Chris's smirk was back, more sinister than ever. Did you really think you could outsmart me? He said, his voice dripping with malice. That little recording won't save you. In fact, it just signed your death warrant. I stepped in front of Olivia instinctively, my body shielding hers. You're not laying a hand on her, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Chris laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You're brave, I'll give you that. Stupid, but brave. One of the men stepped forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. I froze, my mind racing. Was this it? Was this how it ended? I clenched my fists, ready to fight, even though I knew the odds were against me. But before the man could pull out whatever he was reaching for, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The men hesitated, their eyes darting toward Chris, who glared at them in frustration. Who called the cops? He snarled, his voice rising in anger. I turned to Olivia, who was clutching her phone in one hand, her jaw set in determination. I did, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. This ends now. Chris's face twisted in rage. You stupid. He didn't get to finish. The warehouse doors burst open, and a flood of blue and red lights illuminated the space. Police officers poured in, their weapons drawn, shouting commands. Chris and his men froze, their hands slowly rising in surrender. For the first time, the smug confidence was gone from Chris's face, replaced by a look of pure hatred. You'll regret this, he spat, his eyes locking on Olivia. This isn't over. Yes, it is, she said, her voice firm. The police moved quickly, cuffing Chris and his men and escorting them out of the warehouse. One officer stayed behind to take our statements. Olivia explained everything, the blackmail, the threats, the leverage Chris had over her. She handed over the recording device, and the officer assured us that it would be enough to start an investigation. When it was all over, and the warehouse was quiet again, I turned to Olivia. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. It's really over, she said, as if trying to convince herself. I wanted to believe her. But Chris's parting words lingered in my mind, a shadow that refused to dissipate. For now, I said cautiously. But we need to be careful. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. Lucas, I'm so sorry. For everything. I should have told you the truth from the start. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for nearly a decade, the woman who had lied to me, betrayed me, but also the woman who had fought to protect me, even if it meant sacrificing her own peace. We'll figure it out, I said finally. But it's going to take time. We left the warehouse together, stepping out into the cold night air, the kind of ending that felt more like the conclusion of a Reddit cheating story than real life. The sirens were fading into the distance, and for the first time in months, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were wounds that needed healing, trust that needed rebuilding. But as we walked to the car, Olivia's hand slipping tentatively into mine, I realized something. We were still here. Still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.